Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So, over the last week, the trailer for the new Disney Plus Star Wars show that's going to come out next month, which is called Acolyte, has dropped. And many people are, well, let's just say, understandably concerned about one of the lines. I think it's the last line in the trailer, where one of the characters says, "It's not about good or bad. It's about power and who's allowed to use it." And as I've discussed numerous times on my channel with numerous kinds of entertainment going through comic books, television shows, movies, games, you'll see here the exact thing that I have been talking about before about how these people are trying to take a villain and turn them into a quote-unquote hero. The difference here, of course, being the fact that we have numerous statements from the people making the show, to the statement from the trailer, to the people acting in the show, that yeah, this is what they're trying to do. And I want to go over that today because my channel is all about the traditional idea of a hero being a paragon of virtue, and the idea of making a villain into a hero is anathema to the idea of a hero that not only we've all grown up with, but has been the staple of Western civilization for 3,000 years, and is based upon concepts logically derived from a rational analysis of not only human nature, but how human beings tell a story. However, if you're looking for a traditional story with a traditional hero, I have 3 graphic novels, 2 superhero graphic novels, and 1 sword and sorcery low fantasy graphic novel. The links for those are in the description and the pinned comment, and you're looking at some of the spectacular art from those graphic novels in the background. So if any of that piques your interest at all, click on one of those links in the description and go on over and see if one of my graphic novels are for you. Alright, so let's jump right into this. And really, the reason why this is on most people's radar is because this is Star Wars. And although most people are now abandoning Star Wars, or have abandoned it quite some time ago, they still understand that Star Wars is a story based on the difference, the contrast, the fight between the light and the dark, between good and evil, between the heroic and the villainous. Almost cartoonishly so. And yet, you have these people coming straight out and admitting now that this new series is about taking the bad guy, supposedly, they put that in quotation marks, the bad guys, and show them as the underdog, and show them as the heroes. At the very least, to the extent that they say, well, everything's gray anyways, so you can't really apply these definitions of hero and villain to anyone. And before moving on to the direct quotes that I'm going to get into, a lot of people, I'm sure, if they're listening to this video at this point, would say, what do I care anymore? Star Wars is dead. All of these mainstream entertainment, so-called entertainment, shows or movies or games, they're dead at this point. What do I care? Well, we should care, I think, number one, because, yes, you need to admit, if you haven't given up on these properties yet, they're not going to get any better. Waiting and hoping for them to turn around is a fool's errand right now. Number two, we should care because even though we are making advances to try to bring entertainment back to some kind of merit-based system, something that the audiences actually want, you must realize that no matter how far we advance in that cause, the people who control mainstream media, not just entertainment, but media itself, will continue, no matter what, no matter how much they destroy, even themselves, will drive themselves and everything that they control into the abyss of quote-unquote progressive ideological nonsense. And thirdly, but most importantly, is because a hero that is presented by a society is the paragon of what that society is presenting its people as the exemplar of what they want every individual and the society as a whole to become. And if they're touting the fact that everything is gray and we can make a villain into a hero, you best pay attention to what's going on around you, because that's not a world you want to live in. But let's get into this and do a little bit of analysis at the end. I'm giving you quotes from IGN.com articles about the Acolyte television show. I'll put them up in the background, but the first one is titled Star Wars: The Acolyte Showrunner on How It'll Change What We Know About the Jedi and the Sith. So the showrunner, if you don't know by now, is Leslie Headland, who used to be the personal assistant to Harvey Weinstein. So yeah, real paragon of virtue there. And she says, I'm also not sure how Jedi-centric the other shows are. Obviously, Ahsoka is. But we're looking at the Jedi as an institution, as a concept, as an entity that has amassed a lot of power. And that's good. I'm not saying that's wrong. But I do think that when Jodie Turner-Smith has that line at the end of the trailer when she says, it's not about good or bad, it's about power and who's allowed to use it. Really, I think that's the question we're asking. That's really the question. It's not, is someone good? Is someone bad? There's an imbalance. Someone might be imbalanced morally. But if there's a power imbalance, how does that affect the power of Star Wars? And we've never seen the good guys outnumber the bad guys to this extent. I guess that's how it's different. Now, something I want to pull out of this quote. You'll notice the statement, it's not, is someone good? Is someone bad? There's an imbalance. Someone might be imbalanced morally. But if there's a power imbalance, and then she goes on from there. But if you look closely at what she's saying that how is someone imbalanced morally? So how can someone be imbalanced, have a moral wrong, act in a morally wrong way? Well, that occurs if there's a power imbalance. There's no reference here to right or wrong, because as she says, it's not, is someone good, is someone bad? And other people have pointed this out, and rightly, you notice how they use the word bad over and over again. They never say, is someone good, is someone evil? They never use the word evil, they use the word bad, because they don't believe in actual evil. They don't believe in that idea that there's good and evil. It's all about imbalance. It's all about an imbalance of power, even to the extent that what is considered good or bad is determined by any kind of power imbalance that exists. Now, I'll get into more of that in a moment or two, but let's go over a couple of more quotes from the people who are creating this show. The next one is from another IGN.com article titled, Amanda Stenberg reveals how Star Wars The Acolyte was developed with her in mind. Amanda Stenberg being the lead actress in this, I do believe. And she says, in the context of the Star Wars universe, it's a time of great peace, theoretically. It's also a time of an institution. And it's a time in which concepts around the Force are very strict. And I think what we're trying to explore within our show is when an institution has a singular concept of how power can be used. We try to provide a lot of different perspectives and answers to that question. The idea is to kind of honor the ethos of Star Wars and ideas around the Force and also challenge them, hopefully harmoniously. Now, the specific point I want to pull out of this one is the line where she says the show is about when an institution has a singular concept of how power can be used. And of course, what is that singular concept traditionally that, as she says at the end, they want to sort of pay lip service to, but at the same time challenge the idea? Well, that singular concept is the difference between light and dark. That singular concept is the difference between good and evil. That is what must be jettisoned. That is the singular concept that they cannot abide anymore, because in their minds, everything is gray. In their minds, it's not about good versus evil, because such a thing does not exist. It's about power imbalance. And that's why she talks about it's a time of an institution. And again, more on that in just a moment. But let's move on to the last article. Once again, this is an IGN.com article titled Star Wars. The Acolyte is told from the perspective of the bad guys and inspired by martial arts movies. The quotes once again here are from the showrunner, Leslie Headland, the former assistant to Harvey Weinstein. She says, I think if you want to explore Star Wars from the perspective of the bad guys, the best time to do it is when the bad guys are wildly outnumbered, when they actually are essentially underdogs, for lack of a better term. And later on she says, what's so exciting about those stories is that you don't always know exactly who the bad guys and who the good guys are. You're not quite sure whether you can trust the heroine in this case as the result of that. Now, what I want to pull out of this very briefly is the fact that she sees the traditional bad guys in Star Wars, which are the Sith, as the underdogs of this story. And that when you watch it, of course, you don't always know exactly who the bad guys are and who the good guys are. Why? Because everything's great. Why? Because it's all dependent upon power imbalance, and not just power imbalance, but power imbalance as combined with institutional power. That's why she talks about them being outnumbered. That's why they're the underdogs here. Now let's get into the analysis, brief though it might be, of why in the world would people think this way? What is their motive for thinking this way? What is the ideas that they're basing things upon to tie all of this together and have it make some sense? Well, at the very least, make some sense in their minds. Well, it's quite simple, actually, if you know much about what the quote-unquote progressive ideology is. It's the fact that, first of all, they don't believe in good and evil, but at the same time, they contradictory-wise, because they always don't care whether or not the ideas they hold inside their heads contradict each other, but they also set up their own idea of what is evil. And what is evil in their minds? Well, it is the concept encapsulated in the term racism. There is no good and evil in their minds, but if you're racist, well, you're evil. And that may sound like a bit of a leap, but it's all dependent on this fundamental idea within progressivism, which is that prejudice plus power equals racism. Now let's go straight to the horse's mouth, at the very least, the progressively groomed horse's mouth, that is Wikipedia, and I'll give you their definition there of what prejudice plus power means. To quote just the first paragraph of that article of Wikipedia, it says, prejudice plus power, also known as R equals P plus P, is a speculative definition of racism used in the United States. The definition was first proposed in a 1970s book where the author defined racism as prejudice plus institutional power. According to this definition, two elements are required in order for racism to exist: racial prejudice and social power to codify and enforce this prejudice into an entire society. The author writes that while all people can be racially prejudiced, minorities are powerless, and therefore only white people have the power to be racist. This definition is supported by the argument that power is responsible for the process of racialization, and that social power is distributed in a zero-sum game. This view is commonly shared by social liberals and progressives. I like that last statement because it hammers home something I'm always talking about. Yeah, it's not just progressives, it's also social liberals that they say hold this mindset, even if it's in the back of your mind. And it's all dependent on this idea of institutional power and those people who are oppressed. Now, again, looking at this show, people have pointed out that over and over again, especially when you're looking at the Jedi, which seems a little bit contradictory, but again, contradictory is par for the course for these people. If you're looking at the Jedi class of little children within the trailer, you'll see that there are no actual white male children there. Everyone there is a minority of some kind or other, even if they're aliens, because for these people, quite literally, I covered an article about this probably 4 years ago, the term alien, even when used in science fiction, well, actually, especially when used in science fiction, is a code word for black people. So again, going back in your mind to those quotes that I gave from the IGN articles, what do they mention over and over again? Well, they mention institution. Well, they mention power over and over again. They talk about an imbalance of power. They talk about the fact that the underdogs are the ones who are in the minority. And they talk about the quote-unquote heroes of their show being the people who are the underdogs, who are the Sith, who are the people traditionally within Star Wars canon as the evil, villainous protagonists. And why? Well, because, of course, as the showrunner said, it's not, is someone good? Is someone bad? There's an imbalance. Someone might be imbalanced morally, and that imbalanced morality is because there's a power imbalance. The trailer itself saying it's not about good or bad, it's about power and who's allowed to use it. It's the star of the show herself saying that the show is about when an institution has a singular concept of how power can be used. The thread that ties all of those statements together and makes everything quote-unquote make sense is the idea of prejudice plus power equals racism. And of course, in the minds of the progressive individual, racism equals evil. Of course, I'm not saying that racism is good, but this is their word for evil instead of calling something evil. So that's what the entire premise of the story is based upon. It's the idea that prejudice plus power equals evil. This is the view, as Wikipedia says, commonly already held by social liberals and progressives alike. This is how, in their minds, they define evil. It's not actual good versus evil. And how do we know that? Well, it's all in the definition of power plus prejudice itself. Going back to that Wikipedia article where it says, this definition is supported by the argument that power is responsible for the process of racialization and that social power is distributed in a zero-sum game. Now, what does zero-sum game mean? Well, zero-sum game means that if one person or institution or part of society is to advance, is to gain anything, another individual or group or part of society has to lose at the same time. You cannot elevate everyone to the same level. In order for one to gain, someone else must be taken down and lose. So again, what is this power imbalance that they're talking about? Well, they're talking about the fact that these underdogs, the people who don't believe that there's a binary idea of good and evil, the people who think everything is nuanced to the extent that everything's gray and there is nothing that is actually wrong, except of course what the power or the powers that be in their quote-unquote progressive ideological sphere declare to be wrong. Well, those people operate under a power imbalance. They are being subjugated, and in order to redress this power imbalance, in order to balance it out again, you need to bring them up to a higher level. But in order to bring them up to a higher level, since it's a zero-sum game, you need to tear the ones that are in institutional power down. But of course, we know exactly who it is from this definition that they need to tear down. And again, from the trailer itself, we can see who's missing and who needs to be taken down a peg, which is the fundamental message behind this show. And B has, according to this definition, when these marginalized people, when these minorities tear down Whitey and they get into power, they don't become evil themselves. Why? Because, well, as the definition states, adherents write that while all people can be racially prejudiced, minorities are powerless, and therefore only white people have the power to be racist. So the thing is that they might be a little bit prejudiced, but that's fine. They can't be racist. Why? Because they're not white. And to look further into this, just to look at the definition of zero-sum game itself, not only is it a concept where in order for one to rise, someone else must be torn down, but it itself is a part of what is known as game theory. And let's go just briefly to the Wikipedia article on game theory. First, it talks about the fact that game theory is supposedly a part of logic. I'll get into that in just one second. But game theory, as it says, in the 21st century, game theory applies to a wide range of behavioral relations. And it is now an umbrella term for the science of rational decision-making in humans, animals, as well as computers. First off, let's just stop there. So they're saying that game theory is an umbrella term for a science of rational decision-making in humans, animals, and computers. I'm sorry, but animals and computers are not rational. Computers might be based upon a rational principle, but computers themselves are not rational, and animals are definitely not rational. So of course, what are they doing here? Well, they're taking the definition of rationality and completely obscuring it to the point where it means the opposite of what it actually is supposed to mean. If there is a quote-unquote rational decision-making process that is shared by humans, animals, and computers, it's quite simply almost the Hobbesian term of rationality that goes back to, how can I best get this thing that I want? That's it. That's how they define rationality. I want this thing. I get this thing. A computer can do that with its code. An animal can do that with its instinct. A human being can do that with various forms of calculation. But that's it. So they're not actually defining rationality as rationality has been defined for thousands of years. They're defining rationality as a practical science. A practical science is one whose object is utility. That is to say, one whose ends is not the contemplation of truth, but rather the end of some work. That's all rationality is to these people. Why? Because a speculative science, which is the other kind of science, which is based upon reason, has the object of knowledge itself. And the end of that knowledge is truth. Because actual rationality is the analysis of known truths so that we can move from known truths into an unknown truth, which again then will become a known truth. But it's all about truth. That's what rationality is actually based upon. The very concept of rationality and how it is a step-by-step process, which is dependent first upon simple apprehension, that is to say, to define a thing as it exists within reality, to understand it as it actually exists, and move on from there to make a judgment, to say whether this thing is true or not, and then, only then, can you move on to rationality. So the idea of rationality itself must be gotten rid of, even though they claim to be rational in using this practical science where everything is about utility. And in a world where everything is about utility, which I'm talking about this because that's what game theory is, and that's what a zero-sum game is, because a zero-sum game is a part of game theory, and zero-sum game is part of the definition of prejudice plus power equals racism, and racism equals evil, and evil in the mind of the people who are not only creating this show, but shows like it, and entertainment of various kinds, is the fact that, no, it's all about utility. It's all about power. It's all about what you can do with that power. As the trailer itself says, it's not about good or bad, it's about power and who's allowed to use it. Why? Because good and bad are concepts which are derived from speculative sciences that are concentrated on the idea of what is true. No, we must get rid of all of that. We can't have any idea of what is good or evil. That doesn't exist. Only utility exists, and all we care about within utility is power and who gets to use it. And of course, they've defined and redefined everything to the extent that just giving you the definition of prejudice plus power from the Wikipedia article, which is the basic idea of this show, shows you that, well, the people who are progressive, and of course they throw in social liberals as well, they are the people who can wield power without actually being evil. Because, as they never explain, these people can't be evil. So it's their side. Their side should be given all of the power. Why? Because they can't be evil. But the other side can be nothing but evil. Therefore, you must tear them down. This is the presentation of a hero that they wish to give you. And again, I reiterate what I said at the beginning. Is that a society you want to live in? So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget, there are 2 links in the description for my 3 graphic novels, 2 superhero graphic novels, and 1 low fantasy sword and sorcery graphic novel, all based upon the idea of a traditional hero, concentrating on story elements like sacrifice, honor, and virtue. So if any of that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, click on one of those links in the description and go on over and order yourself a copy of one of my graphic novels today. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later.